The idea of globalization was that rich countries would move further up the value chain while the poor countries made the simpler things. You would open an iPhone box and it would say designed in Cupertino, California. Now the implication, of course, is that it would be manufactured in Shenzhen or somewhere else.
United States Vice President J.D. Vance delivered this speech outlining the critical economic and geopolitical imperatives of the Trump administration.
But I think we got it wrong. It turns out that the geographies that do the manufacturing get awfully good at the designing of things. There are network effects, as you all well understand. The firms that design products work with firms that manufacture. They share intellectual property, they share best practices, and they even sometimes share critical employees. Now, we assume that other nations would always trail us in the value chain, but it turns out that as they got better at the low end of the value chain, they also started catching up on the higher end. We were squeezed from both ends.
The event, known as the American Dynamism Summit, took place in Washington, D.C., hosted by the influential Silicon Valley venture capital firm Andreessen Horowitz, a company with substantial ties to both the tech industry and the U.S. government. One of their primary concerns, preparing for a potential conflict with China. This is not mere speculation. A visit to Andreessen Horowitz's website reveals a dedicated page outlining their American Dynamism project. It explicitly details a grave hypothetical war scenario with China in 2027. China initiates a severe incursion into Taiwan. The global supply chain collapses entirely. TSMC, the world's most crucial semiconductor manufacturer, goes dark, crippling vital industries from banking to defense. Russia aligns with China, halting critical gas exports. Fuel prices skyrocket, markets plummet, and inflation spirals out of control. This is the worst-case scenario they are actively preparing for. Their messaging goes beyond mere prediction. It actively manufactures consent for war. The venture capital firm asserts that China is undergoing the largest peacetime military buildup since World War II, and raises alarms about China's growing capabilities in warships, drones, and advanced weaponry. They argue that China is an expansionist power preparing for war, despite the fact that China has not engaged in a war since 1979, while the U.S. has been involved in continuous military conflicts for decades.
The Communist Party of China leads the PRC, is the most potent and dangerous near-peer adversary this nation has ever confronted. They have elements that the Soviet Union never possessed. They are a technological adversary and competitor, an industrial competitor, an economic competitor, a geopolitical competitor, a scientific competitor now, in every realm. It's an extraordinary challenge. It's one that I believe will define the 21st century. When they write the book about the 21st century, there's going to be some chapters in there about Putin, there's going to be some chapters in there about some of these other places, but the bulk of that book about the 21st century will be not just about China, but about the relationship between China and the United States and what direction it went.
So, what is Andreessen Horowitz really doing? It is positioning itself as the intermediary between the U.S. government, private corporations, and the military-industrial complex, laying the economic and technological groundwork for war. The firm has even developed tabletop exercises, essentially war game scenarios, where U.S. officials and corporate executives strategize how to maintain dominance in the event of a war with China. This is the backdrop against which J.D. Vance delivered his speech.
That's what I really want to talk about today, why innovation is key to winning the worldwide manufacturing competition, to giving our workers a fair deal, and to reclaiming our heritage via America's great industrial comeback, and I believe that's what we're on the cusp of, a great American industrial comeback.
His words weren't just rhetoric, they were a clear statement of intent. He outlined the Trump administration's economic strategy, one that revolves around reindustrialization and technological dominance as tools to secure U.S. hegemony.
It should be no surprise that when we send so much of our industrial base to other countries, we stop making interesting new things right here at home. Look, for example, at shipbuilding. Now, if you go back to World War II, America constructed thousands of so-called Liberty ships to carry troops, cargo, and other things, building them at a pace of 3 ships every 2 days. 3 ships every 2 days. Now, we build about 5 commercial ships across an entire year in the United States of America. And as a result, the United States today accounts for 0.1%, 0.1% of global shipbuilding. China, on the other hand, now makes more commercial ships than the rest of the world combined. In fact, one of Beijing's state-owned firms built more commercial ships just last year than all of America has produced since the end of World War II.
In other words, their plan isn't just about competing with China, it's about kneecapping any technological rival that threatens U.S. global dominance.
While we remain the leader in technology and innovation, I think there are troubling signs on the horizon. And I raise all this to ask, does this sound like a regime, I'm speaking of China, that will pass up on the opportunity to use AI or any other technology to advance their own interests and further undermine the interests of their rivals? I think the answer is obvious, and that's why America, we've got to be tech forward.
Vance's argument is that the Trump administration wants to unite populists, as they call them, with Silicon Valley and big tech corporations. Vance claims that there is no contradiction between the working-class people who supported Trump and the billionaire oligarchs in Silicon Valley and big tech, which is obviously an absurd argument.
And this is why I'm such huge fans of yours, of Ben's and Mark's, and of the entire endeavor. And that we recognize now in our administration is the time to align our work interests with those of all of you. It's time to align the interests of our technology firms with the interests of the United States of America.
However, he is trying to bring these forces together against China and the global South. He argues that the United States will re-industrialize by imposing very high tariffs, cutting taxes for the rich, and slashing corporate taxes. Meanwhile, he scapegoats China for all of the economic problems that were actually caused by neoliberal globalization.
Cheap labor is fundamentally a crutch, and it's a crutch that inhibits innovation. I might even say that it's a drug that too many American firms got addicted to. Now, if you can make a product more cheaply, it's far too easy to do that rather than to innovate.
At the same time, Vance and the Trump administration are trying to distance themselves from the neoliberal economic policies of figures like Ronald Reagan. However, in reality, they still support those same policies, including tax cuts for the rich, privatization, and deregulation.
Now, America's not going to win the future by ditching child labor laws or paying our workers less than Chinese or Vietnamese laborers. We don't want that, and it's not on the table. We can only win by doing what we always did, protecting our workers and supporting our innovators, and doing both of those things at the same time. And so, I want to talk a little specifics here. The Trump administration's great plan for staging the great American manufacturing comeback is simple. You're making interesting new things here in America? Great. Then we're going to cut your taxes, we're going to slash regulations, we're going to reduce the cost of energy so that you can build, build, build. Our goal is to incentivize investment in our own borders, in our own businesses, our own workers, and our own innovation. We don't want people seeking cheap labor. We want them investing and building right here in the United States of America.
These policies continue to benefit the wealthy at the expense of the working class, but instead of acknowledging this, they are shifting the blame onto foreign countries, particularly China.